Hey everyone, in this video I'm going to be giving you a brief overview of the development or develop module in Lightroom Classic. So with this video we're going to be talking about development in black and white. Um, Before I get there though, we're going to start on our library module. As you can see, we have a couple images in here, and we also have our collection set up. So we're under our first assignment, our first shoot. And this is kind of where, in the library mode, you can decide on what images you want to work on. Right now we only have two, so I'm not going to go into detail about organizing library and whatnot. We're basically going to choose an image and we're going to take it into develop. So I think we'll work on this image today. I have it highlighted here. So the easiest thing to do is to just choose an image and then go to the Develop tab up top. Once you click that, it'll take you into the development screen in Lightroom. And as you can see, we are now working with one image here, and it's quite large. And this looks kind of different from our library screen. So now on the left-hand side here, we have a navigator. We also have presets and history, and then we can also access our collections from the develop mode, which is kind of nice because you can work through images from a set, and you won't have to go back and forth into your library and kind of find yourself in a groove. We also have the large image here, which is where we're going to see all of our broad adjustments. And then on this right-hand side here, we have all of our drop-down tabs, each of them representing a different element within the development module that you have at your disposal to manipulate your image and change it. Broadly, we refer to this part of the photographic process as editing. And so I'm just going to take you through the basics here, just so you have an idea of where to get started when you're thinking about editing your photographs. And for our purposes, we actually are just going to stay in the basic mode here. What we have up at this top right corner is your histogram. This is an indicator of what is happening during your exposure or in the photograph that you're working on. So it's broken up into sections. We have blacks, we have the shadows. These areas here would be the midtones. And then you have the highlights and finally the whites. And what you're looking for when you're looking at your histogram is for all the information to fall within these confines. If you were to have an image let's say that's underexposed or overexposed, then you would have these lines kind of pulling to either side. As you go down here, we have some other editing tools. I won't cover these at the moment because I want to just give you a basic overview of how to edit photos. In particular, we're going to be thinking about black and white. And under this basic tab is where we're really going to get started. So the first thing you want to do is look at this treatment tab here. And we're now in color, and this is actually how we captured the photograph. The first thing I want you to do is change over to black and white. And when I click on this tab, you'll see that the image is now in a range of grays, whites, and blacks. And this is commonly what we refer to as a black and white image. Right under here, we have temperatures and tints, which is affected by black and white editing, but we're not going to worry about these for the moment. Where I want you to live is kind of in this area here, where we have exposure, contrast, highlights, shadows, whites, and blacks. There is an auto function here for you to play with. I would prefer that you don't use this, as I feel as though going in and adjusting each one of these individually will give you better control over your photograph. I can click on this just to see what Lightroom thinks the image should look like. Not a bad job. a little bit of adjustment, but not too much happening here as far as the auto mode goes. What's nice about the development mode is you have a history here, right? So if you do mess up anything or you want to go back, you can just go back here, click on history, and it'll take you back. One of the reasons why Lightroom is so powerful as a tool is because we refer to this as a non-destructive image editing, meaning any kind of adjustments you do to your image aren't actually affecting the raw file, meaning that if you totally screw up and make this look really wonky, you can always reset everything. One way to do that is to just simply go to the reset button down here, or you can go back to your history, see all the crazy things you did, and decide you don't like them, then go back to your original image. So, where I want you to start is under exposure. What we're looking for when we're editing images, particularly in black and white, is we're kind of looking for all of our areas from the highlights, the whitest whites, to the blacks to have what we call information or texture. So with your exposure, you can make really kind of macro adjustments to the whole image. So if I were to pull this way, I'm adding exposure, meaning I'm simulating another stop or giving more light to the image in the camera. If I were to go the opposite way, I'm simulating giving less light in the camera. So you can see what's happening. Basically, the image is changing, getting lighter and darker as I change the exposure. So this is the direct mirror of your camera. And you can also see that as I move this slider, that our histogram is changing. If I pull it over to giving more exposure, you'll see that the information kind of shifts over to the right, or to the highlights, and the actual image is getting lighter. If I were to pull it this way, and down the exposure, you would see the information shift over to the blacks and the shadows, and then actually our dark area is getting much more dark. This image is exposed rather well, so we don't have to mess too much with the exposure. We can pull it just a little bit, just to bring out some of those shadow areas. I think I'll leave it there. The next slider we have is contrast, and contrast is the relationship to whites and blacks in your image. Typically, the more contrast that's added to the image, the more stark the relationship between blacks and whites. So for example, if I were to take this slider and pull it to the right, increasing the contrast, you can see the image kind of go more black and white. We're losing those mid-tone areas, those middle grays. If I were to pull it the opposite direction, you can see that it becomes much more gray, the image feels a lot flatter. And again, you want your contrast to fall somewhere in the middle. And really, contrast is a lot about feeling. So depending on how you want this image to feel, you can increase your contrast or you can decrease it. I think this image would be nice with a little bit of contrast, as we have some elements here that are a little ominous, like these security cameras. Okay. Exposure and contrast are broad adjustments. After you mess with those and you kind of have them where you want, you can then go into the more fine-tuning or micro adjustments. So here we have highlights first. So if we pull these around, we can see only the areas that are affected are these areas that are on the lighter side, lighter grays and whites. Okay, so as long as we're not losing texture information, we can pull this up. Next we have shadows. So shadows would be these areas kind of that fall between these bricks. Lighter area, a little bit darker areas over here under the awning. Maybe we want to open these up a little bit to show more of the information in there, so I'm going to pull the shadows up. Next we have whites. Whites are going to be the most light areas of the image, or the highlights. And you can actually see on our histogram these areas here that are turning red The histogram is indicating that I'm losing information in here, meaning that it's just a stark white, and that's something that we don't want. We want to have texture and information throughout our image. So we can pull the whites down. To alleviate some of that, we can also go back in here, pull down our highlights. So that seems to be working a little better. So now we don't have this information being lost in here, maybe just a little bit. Put the lights down just a bit. Okay. Finally, we have our blacks. Blacks being the darkest area of the image. Perhaps we open these blacks up a little bit. Okay. So now you can kind of see the separation between these shoes that are sticking out of this hole here. What's also nice about Lightroom is you can zoom in and out. So for example, you see that if I press this, I'm just hovering over the image, I have the zoom out function. Zoom back in and out. Typically what I do is I'll go through exposure, contrast, make some adjustments, the highlights and shadows, then I'll go in and fine tune again. So let's say I want more contrast here, I can bump it up. Maybe the exposure needs to come up just a bit, maybe come down actually. Maybe boost the highlights again. That's looking pretty decent. Okay. So once you decide that the image is kind of where you want it to be, go through, make more adjustments. Once you're good, then you're ready to move on to the next image, or you're ready to export your image. And that's going to be the basics for the develop mode in black and white for Lightroom Classic.